Cool. And then can we lower it back to the bass mode? Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, here we go.
Let's start with hope. I threw it in the middle like a skipping stone. The ripples one, son of a gun. Some would not have thought so, but I stand here, commander-in-chief, and I take that seriously. But along the way, a rogue ripple turned tidal wave. In reaction to what I tried to do, a rebirth of a nation's hatred. Red, white, and blue. There's black in there too. Seriously. One man rewriting the book on bad behavior. Maybe cheats the neighbors, feels he gets what they pay for. We can't pat him on the back and send him on through. No man's ignorance will ever be his virtue. Is this the best we can be? Seriously. Let's talk of fear and why I don't bring it in here. It's a dangerous word, spooks the herd, and we all bleed in the stampede. Fear makes a false friend indeed, and I take it seriously. So hear me now, before the truth gets drowned out by a demigod flexing, a demigod flexing. He's history repeating. Angry, am I angry? You ask, am I angry? And I'm at a loss for words. After all we've done, every battle hard won, every hair gone gray, in the name of this place, in a history plagued with incredible mistakes. Still I pledge my allegiance to these united, divided states. Seriously. Let's end with why. It's a question I wanna ask of us as a populace. Why not take our time, all the weight of this story seriously?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Edward Matthews, and I'm the pastor of McKinley United Methodist Church in the beautiful city of Dayton, Ohio. That wonderful, poignant, powerful, and prophetic song by Leslie Odom Jr. is a reminder of exactly where we are right now. Now, this is the first time since, I think, the third Sunday, perhaps in January, that I haven't been preaching. And it's not that I don't have anything else to say, but we're now in the home stretch of perhaps the most important decision in at least the last 100 years. And so today we launch into a lecture series that's very much centered in our worship, but very much reminded us of who we are as children of God. And so today, just like we do every Sunday, in the midst of our worship, we'll have a discussion that will lead us and guide us into an elevation of different types of thinking and perhaps even decision making. Today we have a special guest that I'll introduce in about 10 minutes. But as we begin to do that, let us continue the practice that we've always done, is to be very mindful of the space and place of stillness. Because with the external crises that are pandemic upon pandemic, particularly if your skin has been kissed by the sun, every once in a while, it's good to be still and know that God is God. Psalm 46:10 reminds us of that, and today we continue in that practice. Can you do me a quick favor? Find yourself and make a sanctuary of wherever you are. Put your feet solidly on the ground. The next thing you do as your feet are solidly positioned on the ground in recognition of the sanctuary is just to sit up just as straight as you can. Why? All week long, the weight of the world, the weight of other people's expectations, perhaps even of your own past, feels like it's overtaking you. But right now, there's something called grace that gives you an opportunity to sit up and be present to the moment in which this encounter might not just change your life, but perhaps change the world. And so you're centered, you're sitting up, and do me one last favor. Open your hands before you. In that opening of your hands, you're opening now yourself with an encounter. That means your mind is open, your heart is open, your spirit is open for an opportunity to be not just transfixed, but transformed. And now if you would just bow your head, do me a favor and take a long, slow, deep breath. Inhale. Exhale. Come on, it's okay. Be still. God's moving in this world right now. Inhale. Exhale. And now as you're finding the rhythms of your breath, a very dear friend of mine and a son of this great church is going to remind you of possibilities. So continue your deep breathing and simply say out loud, God is real. God is real. And as you're finding your breath, I'm going to take you and let you meet a very special friend of mine. God, we thank you for this moment and this opportunity. We are mindful in the sacredness of worship that innovation requires being mindful that the building may be closed, but your arms continue to be wide open. Launch us now into new possibilities that we might meet you in a space and place where your heart not only beats for us individually, but reminds us of how we are inextricably tied together. Indeed, you have the whole world in your hands. And it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Here now is a word from our very own poet laureate. Her name is Faraha.
Poem's titled Aurora. The crescent moons of my fingernails, dark with the grit of connotation, sift through lacerated night clouds to prick lights and nestle them in the furrows of blank pages. Celestial seeds sometimes have difficulty sprouting. I nourish them with the water of revision, re-seeing, looking again, revisioning. I go to work, set out to write a night sky poem. Revisioning is all around me. A building is rising up next to a rose, a concrete blossom I never noticed before. A compass rose, jigsawed concrete triangles beneath my feet, making plain the cardinal directions, north, east, south, west. These mornings, before dawn and after the avian ensembles, when every word formed by my pen is a seed, Venus is shimmering in the east. She guides the sun. Love, love guides our star over the horizon. Each one of us is combing pinpoints of light, creating this varied Amazonian jungle, this redwood forest, this lone Joshua in the desert. Every stroke of chalk on drawing paper, every costume bespoken, every lunge, arabesque, or jeté. Note next to note, next to note, next to rest, next to note on the staff. Each nurtures our own vine and fig tree. It is not easy to burrow through heaven's earth. But today, Venus, she rises before the sun. Courage dawns daily, and we are the compass rose and the earth workers, directing, revisioning, and we are planting the seeds.
And now, a note from our sponsor and a note of introduction. We mentioned that throughout this nation, perhaps throughout the world, churches, the buildings are closed. It seems like they're closed. And yet we know that the arms of humanity and the arms of God remain wide open. Each week at McKinley United Methodist Church, more than 80 young people are engaged in what we call a Corona camp, because we want to make sure that they have disposable cameras and are able to take pictures of their reality and share them with us. Each week, more than 70 of our seniors have food delivered to them because we want to make sure that we're present to real needs and real times. That's why even if the federal government is saying that there's no more money left, we here at McKinley United Methodist Church, with our partners from Primary Health Solutions, have now had 6 7 free COVID testing sites around the city where we've tested more than 1,000 people halfway through the summer because we believe we cannot wait for God's arms to not meet those who need them most. And so right now I ask for you to do me a favor. 196 Hawthorn Street, Dayton, Ohio, 45402. 196 Hawthorn Street, Dayton, Ohio, 45402. You can write a check and help us support those efforts, and maybe it'll fly like a pigeon. Maybe you're like our team up top. We got some millennials up top that like to get on this thing called CashApp, and they $ McKinley UMC, and they make sure that their donation goes through that way. Maybe you're watching and you don't have CashApp, but you could go to www.mckinleyumc.org. Immediately there's a toolbar, and you can help us touch more than 500 families each month by making a donation there. Maybe you're watching it on Facebook and you don't want to miss anything, and you just click out and immediately pull down in charitable causes and see McKinley UMC. Each of those ways help us make humanity human again. Why? Because the building might be closed, but God's arms remain open. And so see us by mail, Cash App, our website, or Facebook. That's a word from our sponsor. Here's a word of introduction. There's a brand new book. You guys know I love to read. Eddie S. Glaude Jr. In this book, it's called Begin Again, James Baldwin and its Urgent Lessons for America and Ourselves. Begin Again by Eddie Glaude. Listen to him discuss and describe the indomitable James Baldwin. Even in the darkest moments in his life and that of his country, Baldwin always believed we could be better than what we thought we are. He also understood that the battle to choose life was fought every day, and imagination was one of his most potent weapons. But he had to fight for that insight, fight against the country's repeated betrayals, fight his own rage and sense of despair, and fight for generations yet unborn. It made for a lonely life, but the fight was his choice. About 8 or 9 months ago, I met a fighter right here in McKinley United Methodist Church. He came with vision and enthusiasm, and his fight transfixed not just the state of Texas, but has energized an entire generation. The fact of the matter is, my friend, the former congressman from Texas, a year ago was talking about white supremacy, reparations, white privilege, and people were looking at him like he was crazy. Like, what white boy talks like that? And yet, he found that that was part of his testimony, as Dr. King says, to make true what you said on paper. And so today, after this song that reminds us who ultimately is in control, the next voice you will hear is that of the voice of God from the former congressman, wonderful husband and father, I believe a future president of the United States, my dear friend, Beto O'Rourke. But first, listen to my big brother, Jeremy Winston, remind us who's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands.
got the whole world in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand. He's got the woods and the waters in his hand. He's got the woods and the waters in his hand. He's got the sun and the moon right in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand. He's got the birds and the bees right in his hand. He's got the birds and the bees right in his hand. He's got the beasts of the field right in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand. He's got you and me right in his hand. He's got you and me right in his hand. He's got everybody in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hand.
Asking me to join you here today. I told you before the broadcast began, this is a huge honor, and I approach it with the humility of knowing that there may be very little that I can add to what you have already brought to all of us this morning, but I will do my best, and then I understand we may be able to have a dialogue and a conversation, which I'm very much looking forward to. But first, let me begin by just saying, listening to Jeremy right now, that rendition was so powerful and makes me feel something very special in a very strong way, the best way I could have possibly started this day. Hearing Ferrara earlier talking about courage dawning daily, again, a very powerful reminder of our agency at this moment. The gentleman playing the trombone and the keys, again, just amazing, kind of transcendent in its ability to lift us up and out of wherever we find ourselves at a particular moment. And then Reverend Matthews, I got to tell you, it is so good to see you and to hear you, even at a distance and through this screen, and albeit not in person. You look good, you look strong, you look healthy, and your words have found a home here in your O'Rourke residence in El Paso, Texas. And I just want to thank you. Reverend Matthews mentioned that we had a chance to meet last year. It was the 24th of September, which happened to be, by the way, Reverend Matthews, my wife's and my 14th wedding anniversary that we were, of course, celebrating at a distance from one another. And I was just so struck by you. Certainly your eloquence and the power of your words and thought, but also your personal empathy and kindness, and how welcome you made me feel in Dayton, Ohio, a city I had never visited before, a stranger in a strange land. And I was at home in your church with you in Dayton. And I want to share this with everyone as well. Though Reverend Matthews and I kept in contact through the duration of my effort to seek the nomination of the Democratic Party for the presidency of the United States, it was after I had to withdraw from the race that I realized how profound his kindness was. He checked in on me the day that we had to leave the race, but then continued to check in on me week after week, month after month, long after the race was over, long after I'd left any kind of public spotlight. And it said to me that Reverend Matthews was my friend and cared about me and loved me and wanted to make sure that I was okay. And Reverend Matthews, I just want to tell you, and I want to tell everyone here who's listening, that has made such a powerfully positive impact on me and even how I see myself at a moment that there was a strong temptation to despair, and maybe an understandable one. But you helped me to bypass that temptation and then move forward and find out what it is that I might do to be able to contribute to the common good in my hometown, in my family, in our state of Texas, and in the country right now. And when I was thinking about you and the impact that you've had on my life so far, it made me think about this moment that all of us are in this country. I'll start with this pandemic that you referenced in your opening. You know, in the United States, though we are 4% of the world's population, we now comprise a quarter of the world's cases of COVID-19, nearly 25% of the world's deaths, the people who have been felled by the most deadly pandemic we have faced since the year 1918 in this country and around the world. In Dayton, and I know in Ohio, you're starting to see a surge, another uptick in cases and in hospitalizations. And I want you and your parishioners and the community to know that we are thinking about you. We're sending our love and our strength. But you are probably also aware that the state of Texas has one of the most uncontrolled spreads of COVID-19 anywhere in the world right now. My hometown of El Paso, Texas, we recently learned has more deaths per capita than any large county in the state of Texas. And there are 254 counties in the state of Texas, a state of 29 million people. In the Rio Grande Valley, south and east of where we are, but still on the border with Mexico, they've run out of nurses. They've run out of hospital beds. They've run out of space to put people who have died from COVID-19. In Houston, which boasts the largest medical center on planet Earth, Texas Medical Center, they have run out of intensive care unit beds there. They're having to set up essentially field or surge capacity hospitals, and they're having to send people to other communities. Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, none of these communities have been spared. There is loss, there is devastation, there is suffering. Much of it preventable if we had listened to the science and the facts and the truth and the best public health guidance. And unfortunately, all of it predictable when we fail to do all of those things. And it leaves us at the precipice of despair. Who are we individually against this global pandemic? Who are we, not elected into positions of public trust or power, to be able to make changes to policy that could save the lives of our fellow Texans or Ohioans or Americans or human beings? Probably the most important designation that we can think about. I also think about an issue that you and I, Reverend Matthews, have spoken much about and texted much about, and I've read much about actually in your excellent book, King in the World, which has inspired me and influenced me and informed the way that I think about justice in this country and justice around the world. The very public murder of George Floyd, the state-sponsored murder of Breonna Taylor, the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, that probably everyone who's watching this right now witnessed through their timeline on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. Here in Texas, the death of Sandra Bland or Botham Jean or Tatiana Jefferson, all at the hands of law enforcement. The men and women who were sworn to serve and to protect all of us, regardless of who we are, where we were born, the color of our skin, the God to whom we pray, the country from which we originally came. This idea never yet realized in the United States of America that we are all to be treated equally under the law. None of us are below the law. None of us are above the law. A beautiful sentiment never fully realized and perhaps most profoundly understood by Black men and women throughout this country who have suffered and have died at the hands of police and law enforcement. I am certain that that provokes thoughts of despair throughout this country. If 400 years since the introduction of slavery, the first time someone kidnapped from their family and their home in Africa, brought here in bondage, forced to build the wealth of this country, a wealth in which they would never fully partake, nor would their descendants 400 years later. If we can't get this right after 4 centuries, what chance do we have to get it right this year or in our lifetimes? Extending from that, I think about this third reason that we might be tempted to despair, and that is just the general course of this country and this planet. The injustice, certainly, of police violence and a criminal justice system that has imprisoned more people here in the United States of America than in any other country on planet Earth. A country where we have millions of our fellow Americans who cannot reliably afford to see a doctor or a nurse or afford medication, even in the midst of this pandemic. A country where in many states like mine, and perhaps in yours in Ohio, the largest provider of mental health care is the county jail system. In the state of Texas, the largest inpatient mental health care facility is the Harris County Jail in Houston, Texas. The fact that we know that we are cooking this planet beyond our capacity to sustain human life and to provide a good life for those generations that will follow ours, our kids, our grandkids, and everyone who comes and succeeds us on this planet, in our homes, in our churches. The economic divide between the wealthiest and the poorest in the United States has never been as great as it is now, with the exception perhaps of the Gilded Age, more than 100 years ago. So many of our fellow Americans not seeing a future for themselves or their kids in the future of this country. Yes, that can tempt us to despair, and that's certainly understandable. So what is the antidote to that? Because if we despair, I believe that is tantamount to giving up, to deciding that we just cannot beat these challenges, that it's the end of this dream, of this idea, of this potential, of this promise of America. And my contention from personal experience is that action is going to be the antidote to this despair. When it comes to this pandemic, our personal actions, the fact that I'm staying at home right now to be with you, and I'm not out there at a restaurant, I didn't go to a bar last night, I'm not mingling with my fellow human beings here in El Paso because I don't want to get any of them sick. I don't want them to pass COVID along to me. I don't want to pass it on to my mother or my sister who has diabetes and a heart condition, underlying vulnerabilities that will kill her if she comes into exposure with COVID-19. I push my elected leaders, those in positions of power and public trust, to do the right thing, to have a statewide mask order or to shut down this state, stay-at-home orders so that we protect everyone in the state of Texas. And we don't have the news that we just read that Corpus Christi has run out of morgue space here in Texas, and they're now calling for FEMA morgue trailers because that's how quickly people are dying. In my own personal life and connecting with the lives of others, we are going to push for that change that we need. That's the only thing that's going to help us and save us, literally save our lives going forward. And we're beginning to see some signs of hope. The governor, I think, responding to the public pressure that all of us are a part of, that public pressure that forms the political will, recently implemented a statewide mask order. Good step in the right direction, totally insufficient to the challenge that we face, but a good step, and should encourage us that this pressure that we've applied is working, and so that we've got to keep it up. And that should extend through every single place of power, be it city council, the state legislature, the governor's mansion, and the White House. Let's not give up on hoping and working towards our national government doing the right thing, although they have not thus far. When it comes to the injustice in this country, yes, we are tempted to despair when we see a man publicly murdered before our eyes, and the white police officer who murders that man looks right into the camera. He knows that someone is filming this on their cell phone, and he doesn't care. And in effect, he's saying to all of us, as he looks right at us, eye to eye, I can do this because I'm white and I'm a police officer. And this man on whose neck I kneel is black. And yet, in thousands, not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of American cities, including Vidor, Texas, which has a long, sordid history of association and affiliation with the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacy here in the state of Texas. People of all ages, walks of life, and backgrounds are taking to the streets, literally, together, to defy the inherent structural systemic racism of this country. And to say, look, for those of you in elected office, what you have done thus far is clearly insufficient. And so we want to force you, by taking power into our own hands in these streets, to do the right thing. We will provide for you the courage that thus far you have lacked. And there is precedent for this, of course. As proud as I am of Lyndon Baines Johnson, my fellow Texan, signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it was not because of Lyndon Baines Johnson, nor the members of the House and the Senate who served in 1964 and 1965, that we have those two landmark pieces of civil rights legislation. No, instead, it is because of men like John Lewis, women like Fannie Lou Hamer, Rosa Parks, nameless people, because there were so many of them and their names were not recorded, who took to Greyhound buses in the freedom rides throughout the Deep South, taking their lives in their hands to do so. Those who marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, those who risked their economic well-being to participate in the bus boycotts that brought the powers that be to their knees and shocked and galvanized the conscience of this country to do the right thing. Black Lives Matter is in a very long, proud tradition of those who struggle and sacrifice and serve for the civil rights for all of us. So that gives me some hope and that gives me some inspiration. And again, we are beginning to see changes in policy owing to those who are willing to stand up and march, stand up and serve, stand up and lift their voices. And lastly, in terms of the direction of this country, many have argued, and I don't feel that I can disagree with them, that this is the most historic moment in terms of determining the future of this country since the election of 1860. The election of November 3rd, 2020 will define more than any other moment in our lifetimes who we are as Americans and who America will be for our kids and our grandkids and the generations that follow ours. Now, we are up against someone in the highest office in the land, the most powerful position on the planet, who disregards rule of law, who defies the Constitution, who traffics in lies, who espouses racism and hatred and intolerance. And part of the reason that I was in Dayton on the 24th of September in 2019 is because your community and my community share a very dark and trying experience. The open murder and slaughter of our fellow citizens, the people who call our communities home. And in the case of El Paso, 23 human beings were killed by a man who was inspired by our president to order an AK-47 online legally in this country that allows you to buy weapons of war, though they are designed exclusively for the killing of our fellow human beings as effectively, as efficiently, in as great a numbers and as quickly as humanly possible. He bought that gun, and listening to a president who described people who arrived to this country from south of the border as an invasion, as an infestation, as animals, who put them in cages and took their children from their parents. This man, inspired by our current president, drives 600 miles, opens fire in a Walmart the Saturday before school begins in El Paso that fall, and kills 23 people based on the color of their skin and their assumed country of national origin. Who are we? Who am I individually up against that kind of power and force and hatred? And yet, throughout this country, here in Texas, we're seeing record numbers of new voter registrations. We're seeing record numbers of people getting organized and activated and getting together with political organizations and campaigns and candidates, making sure that every single one of us makes the most of this moment, not denying our agency or our potency in the face of such evil and such challenges, but proudly taking up this responsibility, this obligation, and this opportunity to do everything we can with what we have, where we are right now. And that's what I feel, and that's what gives me so much hope. Reverend Matthews mentioned the great work that you all are doing. One, to make sure that young people are recording their experiences for posterity right now. And I think in some ways to remind those young people that not only are they witnesses to what is happening, they are active participants to the solutions to the challenges we face. Feeding senior citizens in your community at a time of record economic contraction and decreased mobility for those seniors to go out and feed themselves. I'll tell you what, when Amy and I and our kids have volunteered at the food bank, not only do I feel like I'm doing the right thing and get a little burst of positive energy from that, I also feel so good that I've taken action in the face of something that otherwise could overwhelm me. When I join a voter registration phone drive or a voter contact phone drive here in Texas, where the race between the Democratic nominee and the Republican nominee is now neck and neck. In my adult lifetime, it has never been that way. We've never been in contention. We have never mattered. Now we do. After making 2.5 hours of phone calls with hundreds of other volunteers, I come back from that experience not only feeling like I did the right thing, the responsible thing, I feel good. I feel energized. I feel like I have purpose and function in this country and in my life. In other words, whether it's being at the marches here in El Paso to demand that those in positions of power acknowledge that Black lives matter, whether it's volunteering at the food bank, or whether it's helping my fellow Texans register to vote and make a commitment to vote, that has been my antidote to despair. And I believe is the key to victory against every single one of these challenges that we face, including, I would argue, the most significant challenge of them all, deciding the future and the fate and the fortune of this country at the ballot box on November 3rd, 2020. So, Reverend Matthews, I don't know what wisdom I have to share with you or your congregants and parishioners, but I wanted to share my personal reflections of how I've overcome that temptation to despair by devoting myself and my life to action. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation with you. Thank you again for having me out today.
Now, there is a tradition in the African American community where after you hear good preaching, you say the doors of the church are wide open. We say that, and we're mindful that at no point did my dear friend ask you to vote for anyone. Humanity is a nonpartisan issue. But what is on the ballot box in November is decency. And so I appreciate the negative comments in our feed because you remind us that we continue to do the right thing as we attempt to, in this lecture series, do three things: inform, inspire, and incite. And we thank my dear friend for doing each of those things. And now as we move and pivot to another part of this worship service, Beto has given us an opportunity to open up the floor to questions. Our partners in Elevate Dayton, a wonderful media company right here in Dayton, Ohio, energized and empowered and constructed by powerful African-American millennials, have now a couple questions that they'd like to ask. Natasha Ivory, one of their correspondents, has a couple questions for our dear friend now.
Hi, Mr. Beto. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to be with you this morning.
It's an honor to meet you. You look moisturized. You look good during COVID, sitting in the library. You're looking good this Sunday. You're looking good. We're proud.
You as well.
Well, thank you. I do have a few questions. I'm the editor-in-chief, of Elevate Dayton. I also am a freelance journalist in the community, and I run my own media platform called Cultured. So listening to you talk about COVID and the state of unrest, You kind of answered my questions, but I want to get specific if you don't have a problem with that. So when we talk about the current state of the world, we're in the middle of a racial uprising, and we're talking about the very public state-sanctioned murder and state-sponsored murder of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and looking at our ballot box in November and the president that we currently have, who you know is racist, sexist, transphobic, among some other things. What do you think are specific responsibilities that the current political candidates need to handle in terms of talking about not how racism is on the surface, but the roots of racism, and address how it's upheld in the country? What are their specific responsibilities in the ballot box in November to address those? And then also, what can the citizens do to press our political pundits and make sure that those don't get unanswered?
Yeah. Thank you for the questions, and thank you for the work that you're doing in the community and then for all of us in the country. I think fundamental, and this is one of the three I's that Reverend Matthews just mentioned, making sure that all of us are informed and actually understand the story of this country. As a white man, and through my education in public schools here in El Paso and then in college in New York, I never, ever fully understood, or really even had a legitimate comprehension of the real story of this country and the real experiences of my countrymen and countrywomen. A real breakthrough for me this past year was reading Nicole Hannah-Jones' 1619 Project through the New York Times, which I'll tell you, again, as a white man and as someone who was involved in public life, when we were talking about race, typically, we were talking about the criminal justice system. And I'd written a book about 10 years ago on the war on drugs and its disproportionate impact on Black and Brown Americans. And also my sister city of Ciudad Juarez, that we were connected to here in El Paso, that bore the brunt of that war on drugs. But reading Nicole Hannah-Jones, reading Brian Stevenson, reading other authors who have been generous in sharing their experiences or the research experiences of Black Americans, I really began to appreciate that it's not the criminal justice system, it is every single facet of American life that is informed by slavery and its legacies, and really the legalized institutional slavery that followed slavery by another name. To digress, but I think this is pertinent. In Fort Bend County, which is just outside of Houston, Texas, in the southeast part of the state, only a 12-hour drive from where I am in El Paso on I-10. They were building a new public school in the Fort Bend Independent School District. And as they were preparing the ground, they unearthed a common grave, which when they did the forensic investigation, discovered that it was a mass grave of Black men and Black boys who had been arrested at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, for the crime of being Black, to provide for the labor needs of the Imperial Sugar Plantation in Fort Bend County, Texas, and arrested for loitering or crossing the sidewalk, or really, I don't even know if a pretense was needed. And as they did the investigation, the forensic investigation, they determined that those men and those boys did not die of natural causes. Many were literally worked to death, their muscles torn from their bones. That is long after the Civil War, that is long after Reconstruction. And it then continues through our current criminal justice system, but also access to healthcare, access to the ballot box in my state that is 50th in voter turnout, not by accident, but by design, through the poll tax, through the all-white primary that existed for 20 years in the 20th century, where if you were Black or Brown, by law, you could not vote in the Democratic primary, which was all important and dispositive to the outcome of every single election in the state of Texas. You have the most onerous voter ID laws, you have racial gerrymandering, and now in the midst of the pandemic, our governor will not allow you to vote by mail, another voter suppression tactic. It is found in housing and redlining, in access to mortgages, in the creation of wealth or the denial of the creation of wealth. It is everything in America. So when we talk about systemic or foundational or fundamental, all of those words are accurate, and yet they don't do enough to describe how profoundly unjust this country is for so many. And so to answer your question, you bring it back to the political sphere. What role does this conversation have in our elections? And I'd argue that I think that, many white politicians and perhaps politicians of other races and ethnicities have been uninformed in some instances on these issues and the historical sweep of these issues. And then I would argue they have been afraid to confront a white majority country, to confront an electorate which in some significant part is racist as well, as evidenced by Donald Trump's strong support, regardless of the racism that he openly trucks and traffics in right now. And yet, if America is denied this opportunity to have this conversation now, and it's rare that you have the entire nation's focus on these political and policy issues like you do in a presidential election, we will have squandered one of the best and maybe one of the last opportunities to actually achieve justice or make significant progress towards that justice. So I really hope from the presidential election on down to the courthouse elections, every single candidate is talking about this and specifically addressing how they propose to help to make this right. And I sincerely hope that every member of the electorate, every voter, every one of us is challenging them and holding them to account and pushing them to answer these specific questions. And then last thing, I think we also have to acknowledge, as important as registering and voting and getting our friends and family and classmates and colleagues to register and vote as well, that is simply insufficient. We also have to be out there in the streets demanding change. That's what I think has shocked in part the conscience of this country in this generation, and then hold those who are elected on November 3rd accountable for the promises and the commitments they have made. There's this apocryphal story, and Reverend Matthews might know the history on this better than I do, but apparently a delegation of the NAACP came to Franklin Delano Roosevelt in one of his first terms to talk about the state of justice and injustice in the United States of America, to make some very specific proposals to President Roosevelt about how he could remedy them. And allegedly, and again, this is an apocryphal story, President Roosevelt said, "You're right. Now make me do something about it." In other words, help create the political conditions that allows me to pass the legislation that will address these injustices. That's what I think Black Lives Matter and other protesters who are out in the streets are doing right now. They're bringing to the fore a conversation this country has been owed for a long time, but has been too afraid to have. Let's press that advantage, not just in the elections, but in the administrations and in our local governments in the months and years that follow. Thanks for the question.
You're really radical on deep down on the inside, and I appreciate that. That's what we need. We don't have a lot of, I think, political pundits who are as apologetic about issues that we face. And you notice, well, you talked about by design, and everything it seems that Black and brown people deal with as far as legislation and gerrymandering and even disproportionate health issues are by design. Nothing is by accident. So that kind of pivots into my question about COVID. Dealing with COVID-19 in these unprecedented times, it's a lot to deal with for a lot of people, and especially Black and brown people in low-income areas who don't have access to like mass or proper health care. It's interesting because COVID-19, when it was first introduced, it was said that it wasn't going to affect millennials. It was mainly older Caucasian folks, but now, as it always does, Black and brown folks are left to pick up the pieces of the pandemic, and we're fighting too, because we're fighting racial unrest and injustice and COVID. So my question with that is not necessarily directed to Black and brown people, but in general, what would you tell the folks who are saying that they don't want to wear a mask because it's impeding on their civil liberties, combined with all the racism that disproportionately affect us? And in that same hemisphere, how would you tell people to prepare for life and still have hope in a life that's post-COVID?
So there was this very interesting and telling moment a month or two ago our lieutenant governor, and by a quirk of our state constitution, the lieutenant governor is arguably the most powerfully elected person in the state of Texas, more so than the governor. His name's Dan Patrick, and he was being interviewed on Fox News, and he was making an argument to reopen the state of Texas. We'd only been locked down for, I don't know, a week or two at that point. And he says this, he says, there are more important things than living. In other words, tacitly, I will acknowledge that people will die if we reopen the state, but there are more important things than living. But what that begs is this question: who is it, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, that you want to do the dying? In a state where the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, which by every measure is not a living wage. You cannot work just one $7.25 an hour job and feed your family and pay the rent and make ends meet. You will need 2 or 3 of those jobs to do that. Who's working those jobs in Texas? Disproportionately, they're African-American and Latino Mexican-American Texans. Who is hospitalized right now? We are breaking every record for current hospitalizations in the state of Texas, current case counts, and unfortunately current deaths. Disproportionately Black and brown Texans. I mentioned at the outset of my remarks, the Rio Grande Valley, which is McAllen and Brownsville and Harlingen. That part of the state is 95% Mexican-American. And you just hit upon this really important idea that we disregard that things are coincidental or accidental. In other words, some people are okay with some people bearing the brunt of this infection and the hospitalizations and the suffering and the death. And so when you see an all-white elected government in the state of Texas, in a state that is a minority majority state, by the way, that has the most sordid history of economic and healthcare and voter suppression, I would argue, in the union, or at least we're a contender for it, then make no mistake about what is going on and why that state government resists wearing masks, resists stay-at-home orders, resists allowing the local governments in the Rio Grande Valley that have pleaded with the governor and lieutenant governor, please allow us, if you won't do it statewide, allow us to mandate a stay-at-home order. We just want to save lives. We've run out of hospital capacity. We don't have any more nurses left. They're getting sick and they are dying as well. So we would be blind not to see this. And we would be complicit not to call it out. And so we must. And then we must look at ourselves and understand that the choices that we make to wear a mask or not to wear a mask, as you suggest in your question, do not just impact us. They impact everyone around us. And when we think of who is most vulnerable and who is most likely to be harmed by this current pandemic, if we open our eyes to it, it is not people who look like me. It is people who've been denied access to healthcare, access to education, access to justice, access to nutrition in the food deserts that exist in Black and brown communities throughout the state, all of which are preconditional for the rising cases of COVID and COVID hospitalizations and COVID deaths in the state of Texas. So yes, we're all in this together, and every one of our individual actions in some way will affect everyone else, but we're not all in this together in terms of the impact of this disease. This is hitting some communities and some people harder than others. Let's be aware of that.
You kind of answered it already when you were first speaking, when you first introduced yourself, so I can tell that you already are. But you personally, how do you put your faith into action? Meaning, how do you use your faith to amplify your voice so that you continue to be a beacon for those who are marginalized, LGBTQ who are getting, and trans folks who are getting murdered at an abysmal rate, dealing with COVID, dealing with racial unrest? How do you put your faith into action to become an ally personally so that your voice can be amplified?
That's the question I've really been struggling with for a while now, and tried to address in my comments. It's not easy, and it's not routine, and it doesn't roll of its own accord. I definitely need help, and it's one of the reasons I mentioned Reverend Matthews reaching out to me. He doesn't know it, or maybe he does, but I needed that help and that love and that support from him, from someone I respect and admire at a time that I was at my lowest. Kind of a reminder that, hey, Beto, you still have a role to play, and who knows what it will be. But get after it, and let's do this. Be part of the conversation. And I think it's so important for us to remind ourselves of that, because there are so many reasons, rational, logical reasons to give up. And yet we have to deny that temptation. And we have to find, I don't know if this is the right word for it, but some joy and certainly some fulfillment in acting, even if the goal of our actions will not be realized in our lifetime. To know that we are on the right side of these struggles, and to look back. I mentioned John Lewis was in the news a lot yesterday, and so I was thinking about him and these iconic pictures of John Lewis with all of these other heroic Americans, walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I think about those Black Lives Matters protesters and leaders who bore the brunt of the rubber bullets and the tear gas and the police beatings. They were doing that not just for themselves, and not only for what they could realize as a direct result of their protest and action, but for all of us many generations later. I want to be part of that in some small way, whatever way I can fit in or have function or perform to my potential. And so I'm moved when someone takes the time to share their story or to ask for my help. I was in Detroit at this place called the Narrow Way Cafe. And this is when I was running for president, and I'd given my stump speech. And as with every single one of the events that I did when I was running, we had a town hall conversation, discussion. Anyone could ask a question, make a comment, level their criticism at me. And this woman, transgender Black woman, raised her hand. She said, Beto, I haven't heard you say anything about what I am most concerned about and what is devastating my community right now. These murders of transgender Americans, and disproportionately Black transgender women, that are happening without any follow-up investigation, without any justice. In other words, you can be killed with impunity in this country if you happen to be transgender and if you happen to be Black. And I want to know what you are going to do about it. And I didn't have a great answer for her. I mean, of course, I said, well, that shouldn't happen, and the police should be held to account for investigating those murders. And but I said, look, I'm going to admit to you my ignorance on this issue and my need for help. Will you help me? And this woman said, I will. And true to her word, not only did she offer her help, but she also held me accountable. She would call me or text me if she saw me at a debate or an event. And if I didn't address the issue squarely head on, call out injustice where I saw it and offer a proposal to fix it where we could find one. So she inspires me. And she, like Reverend Matthews, she still stays in touch with me. After the campaign, hey, Beto, are you okay? And then in the following months, hey, Beto, we need your voice out there. I need you to step up. And in fact, I just did a Zoom call with her in Michigan because they're working on a really important ballot initiative there to address this issue. So look, I count myself so lucky to be in this fight and to be part of this struggle and to join so many amazing, wonderful people in that. And that's what gives me hope in the face of this despair. Action is the antidote to despair, and it's the key to victory.
We want to thank my dear friend Beto for taking the time out today. Again, each month we will have an opportunity to inform, inspire, and incite. There will be some people on the other side of the aisle that come into this conversation. Why? Because this conversation is the most consequential, perhaps I know of my lifetime, and perhaps even in yours. And so we here at McKinley United Methodist Church know for sure that the cross of Christ goes vertical, that we might stretch out to God to work on our own various imperfections, but it also stretches horizontal, that we might pull each other closer in the fight for justice and dignity, and indeed make humanity a tad bit more human. And so we thank our partners. We thank this future Pulitzer Prize winning journalist.
Elevate Dayton thanks you so much. It was an honor speaking to you.
And as we continue now in this space and place of worship, Beto, we'd like to lead out in a prayer by my friend and our student pastor, Jeremiah. You touched him very significantly. You were walking out the door. Jeremiah is our student pastor who's now working on his doctorate of ministry at United Theological Seminary. He's going to issue out a word for prayer for all of us. And we thank Desiree Timms, who happens to be running for the Ohio 10th right here, for making that introduction. Thank you, Desiree. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She's a member of the church and continues to make our own historic bid right here in the Ohio 10th.
Good morning, church. Please close your eyes and let us pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive our debtors, as we also forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours now and forever. 我们在天上的父，愿人都尊你的名为圣，愿你的国度降临，愿你的旨意行在地上，如同行在天上。我们日用的餐饮今日赐给我们，免我们的债，如同免了人的债，不叫我们遇见试探，救我们脱离凶恶，因为国度、权柄、荣耀都是你的，直到永远。Amen.
Amen. We now have, Beto, feel free to join us for about 7-8 more minutes. We know you have an exit post-interview with Elevate Dayton, but feel free to stay involved. Cue this clip. I want you all to hear from a mentor of mine. His name is Waldo Jeff. Waldo Jeff is an 80-year-old patriarch, was the first manager of diversity at Procter & Gamble. He had this poem that brought me to tears when I visited him yesterday. I think it was a great way for us to close out right before we hear our closing song.
Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. I'm a proud African-American man. I'd love to be in a picture on a black hero stand. Brought to America as kidnapped slaves, black women and men continue to be brave. When we study African-American history, black brilliance and black heroes are no mystery. Ignorance of our historical brilliance is simply regrettable. The depth of black intelligence and courage have been incredible. I love 20th century leaders Dr. King and Malcolm X. Yet the question about black American leadership is always, who's next? It's important that we never forget recognition of black women is a winning bet. Historic black women were in Dr. King and Malcolm X's life. Recall Dr. King's executed mother and each man's exceptional wife. The memory of great black women brings tears to my eyes. To express my love, I simply look to the skies. From 1619 until America today, black women have shown this nation the way. When we tell our 400 years horror story, black women play major roles. in all our history's glory. My life's memories of the American story are strong. Racial exclusion and discrimination have been lifelong. Blacks still fight racial battles and voter suppression. Thank God the value of our lives is in our possession. Our children may face some of the same oppression. So fight on, and the urgency of now remain the lesson. Be brave, learn Black history, always do your best. 400 years of struggle shows we keep passing the test.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charles Johnson Sr., and I am the lay leader here at the historic McKinley United Methodist Church. I'd like to thank everyone out there for watching our live stream, either be it on Facebook or YouTube. Also, I'd like to thank our guest speaker today, Beto O'Rourke, for his powerful message and his thoughtful insights on the situations that are happening in our country today. In case you wasn't here earlier and missed it, when our pastor spoke about our donating page, we have 3 ways here at McKinley to give. 1, by check, you can send it to 196 Hawthorn Street, Dayton, Ohio, 45402. That's 196 Hawthorn Street, Dayton, Ohio, 45402. Or you can send it by CashApp. That's at $McKinleyumc. That's $McKinleyumc. Or thirdly, you can go to our donate page at www.mckinleyumc.org. That's at www.mckinleyumc.org. Or you can also go to our Facebook page and donate there. Now, we thank the Lord for being with us today. And as we leave this place, we ask for him to grant us peace in our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
shall not be moved, just like the tree that's planted